Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Ogden. I'm the Managing Director of the Financial Access Initiative at NYU Wagner and leader of the Small Firm Diaries Global Project. Today, we want to give you an introduction to the Small Firm Diaries project globally and especially in the United States, and talk about some of the issues that we have, understanding the current state and the challenges and the appropriate policies, products that can support small businesses, small firms in lower income neighborhoods in the United States. So we're going to take a little bit of time here at the start to talk about the Small Firm Diaries project overall. And then we'll be joined in conversation by three folks who pay a lot of attention to this space. Chi Mack, who is with the JPMorgan Chase Institute, where they do a lot of research using the data from Chase to understand small businesses. Jay Nwachu, who is with an organization that supports small firms in Baltimore, and Amy Hereford, who's the CEO of LiftFund, a small business CDFI lender based out of Texas, but covering a good part of the country. At least we hope Amy will be joining us. She hasn't arrived yet, but all belief is she'll be here by the time we get to that part. So I'm going to ask Laura now to share the slides that we have that I'll walk you through as we go through our introduction. Thanks, Laura. So as you may have seen, this is what we're talking about today is a global project to understand small firms using diaries methodology, and we'll get into what that is as we go. This is a project encompassing the United States, but also a number of other countries across the world: Colombia, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Fiji, to give us this global perspective. So, what are diaries? Some of you may be familiar with financial diaries as a methodology. This is a methodology to better understand the financial lives and activities of people throughout by going in depth, tracking them with high frequency data, but also marrying it with qualitative data along the way so that we understand not just the quantitative side of things, but also the reasons behind decisions that people make and the features and the factors that go into those decisions. So diaries are known for some original work that was done in South Africa, Bangladesh, and India to understand the financial lives of people living in extreme poverty, defined as under $2 a day. And then in the United States, bringing that to low-income families in the United States back around 2017. But we do financial diaries overall is because they give us a window into a much greater level of depth of understanding the day-to-day, month-to-month decisions that people have, the reasons behind those financial decisions, but also an important window into what people don't do, things that don't show up in the data because of choices that they didn't make, whether they considered something and then didn't do it, or even the things that they hadn't even thought about doing. Now, this methodology was originally inspired or created to follow households. But the kind of insight that it gives is really useful for understanding small firms as well. So if we move on to the next slide, understanding these firms, there are a bunch of questions that we have about small businesses, particularly small businesses in low-income neighborhoods. So if you're familiar with a lot of the research, you'll know that small firms in general struggle to grow. The majority of small firms start with 0 workers and never hire a worker. Why is that? Well, certainly one factor is that people don't necessarily start small firms to grow. And so understanding the difference between firms with growth aspirations who aspire to add workers and get bigger and bigger versus small firms that are really just about buying a job or maintaining control of one's own work. Uh, it's hard to see the differences between those. Secondly, there's a big issue of understanding the difference between words and phrases that we use that are conflated and not always entirely clear what people mean when they use the phrase micro enterprise versus small business or small firm versus a mid-sized firm. And you'll see in that little chart that those definitions are not always very clear. In the United States, a small business, by definition of the Small Business Administration, is from 0 to 500 paid workers. And those 0 and 500 firms don't have very much in common. Part of the reason we use the phrase small firm specifically is to be clear, and we'll come back to that. But the big question that we often have in understanding these businesses is there are, from research, two very clear transition points for small firms. The transition from 0 to 1 paid worker, and the transition from 0 to 1 paid manager who's not the owner. Beyond that, there seems to be a lot more in common once a firm has gotten to the stage of having managers that aren't the owner. As they grow, obviously, there are some differences as you go from 50 to 100 to 500. But those businesses with paid managers have a lot more in common with much larger firms than they do potentially with firms that haven't made that transition. And so we want to understand what's happening both in these firms that have been able to make that transition from 0 to 1 paid worker, but not necessarily the ones who have made the transition from 0 to 1 paid manager. And we also think there's a lot more in common for small firms of this type in low-income neighborhoods in the United States with what we see internationally and vice versa, that there's a lot to learn, what we call the Great Convergence. I have a paper from a few years ago titled The Great Convergence, talking about how much there is to learn from domestic and international contexts. Next slide, please, Laura. I do quickly want to touch on here what we found from our global work. And the way the Small Firm Diaries project has worked is we followed these firms internationally in these other countries in 2021, 2022, and are now bringing this project to the United States. So just very quickly, and you can find all of this data on smallfirmdiaries.org, but at the high level, what we found in the United States, and we are very interested in seeing where those overlaps, what we found internationally, and see where those overlaps are in the United States. One is that these small firms, firms with paid workers, are really a distinct group. They are different from what is traditionally targeted in the micro enterprise world. So that transition from 0 to 1 paid worker is different. It puts you in a different category. And very few of the firms that we found with paid workers started in the traditional micro enterprise way that we see, and we talk about micro enterprise internationally. Second, these firms are run by people who do, by and large, have significant growth aspirations. So it's not as if they're happy being where they are. They do want to grow their businesses materially, but a equal goal of theirs is to increase stability of the business. So they don't want to stay where they are. They want to grow, but they want to grow in a slow and steady and stability creating way. And so we coined this phrase stability entrepreneurs that describes 60 to 70% of the firm owners that we studied. Third, the missing ingredient largely for these firms is working capital, not asset capital. So traditionally, when we talk about lending to these kinds of firms, the question is, how do we give a big lump sum so they can buy a machine, so they can invest in a meaningful way in the business? But as we follow these businesses, what we find is, they have machines often. They've gotten that hump to get to invest and create the business, but they don't have the working capital, the liquidity, the cash flow to operate at efficiency. And so they don't need a loan to buy another machine. They need credit to be able to manage the ups and downs of the business. But one of the things we'll talk about today is that's very difficult credit to offer. And so we need to have creative ways of meeting that gap. And then fourth, because of that gap in working capital, The jobs in these firms are very fragile. So the workers being paid by these firms are typically from a lower socioeconomic strata than the owners. But the owners don't have a lot of cushion to be able to manage the ups and downs. One of the few outlets they have to be able to manage those ups and downs is by cutting work. And so the workers themselves bear the brunt of the volatility that the firms face. That is a real problem for these firms and for the workers in those firms. And a question of how can we create environments where the firms have other ways of managing volatility that don't fall primarily on the people least able to bear that. Next slide, please. So turning here to the United States, as I mentioned, we have now bringing this project to the United States, studying small firms in the United States in a variety of places to add to this what we've learned internationally. And on the next slide, we'll start to look at where we are in the project. So the project is being led by the Financial Access Initiative and working with an organization called EA Consultants to manage the field work, funded by the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, MasterCard, and the Aspen Institute. And we've got a fantastic group of advisory board members with a lot of experience in this space helping advise the process. Where we are in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here is to better understand the opportunities and challenges facing these firms, to make sure that we can contribute to better policies, programs, and products for those firms. What are we really trying to learn? We really want to understand how to think about these firms, the difference between the owner and the firm, the difference between the household of the owner and the firm. Over what period of time should we be looking at to understand these firms? Monthly, weekly, yearly, longer term trajectories, understanding the jobs, the decisions that owners make about where and how to grow and what to add internally versus externally, how we should be thinking about productivity, profitability, and growth of these firms, and understanding the role of volatility in these firms and in these households. Next slide. How do we do that? Well, we're gathering the quantitative data from their bookkeeping records. A feature of the United States is that you can't really be paying workers without keeping electronic records. And so we're gathering from the bookkeeping data from the firms themselves. So we're seeing what they are keeping and how they're keeping those records. But we're also doing regular in-depth surveys to go behind those numbers on a variety of topics, on their financial management behaviors, on their household and their aspirations, on their management and business practices, how they access and use credit, how they hire and manage their workers. We're also really interested in the workers themselves. And so there are a couple of surveys where we're talking to the workers to better understand their experiences and their background. And then, we're bringing those two things together to be able to understand the full picture. Where are we doing this? We're doing it primarily in 6 cities that you see on the map, but with a few other firms scattered around the country to provide a little bit more access to some rural firms and some other geographic areas. The firms have 2 to 20 paid workers. So you have to have paid workers in the year. We are already seeing some firms react by not necessarily paying workers in the most recent weeks. But these are firms that have graduated to those 2 to 20 paid workers. We require the businesses to have been in business for at least 2 years. Because, again, if you know some of the literature here, you'll know that more than 50% of firms that are started exit within 2 years. So we're trying to find those firms that are more likely to survive for the year that we're following them. And then we're requiring them to operate in low income neighborhoods and for those workers to be drawn from low income populations. Where we are right now, we have started data collection. We've recruited more than 60 firms, close to 90 firms, I believe, at last count, to participate in the study. And we're in what we call Survey 3 and 4, gathering this data. We're gathering last year's bookkeeping records as well as ongoing records. And you'll start to see things emerge in 2026 as we start to gather the data and analyze it. Who are these firms exactly now that we've recruited some of them, not just in the broader picture? Um, so you will get a view of where they are. So 90% of the firms are at least 3 years old, and almost half are 5 years or older. That is a select group of firms, as we mentioned, because of exit rates. That's actually a small number of firms overall that are started that last that long. Most of them are in the services sector, but you can see there's a fairly diverse set of sectors. And you see on the left some of the statistics about the size of these firms. Now, I want to point out one thing here that is about this the challenge of really understanding firms and how different that is from understanding households, because firms are designed to be able to manage their finances differently. So you'll see there that the top end of the yearly revenue, the monthly expenses, and then the bottom end of the monthly net income. So in the past year, one of our firms had monthly net income in 1 month of negative $20,000. That's also the firm that has the highest yearly revenue, the highest average monthly revenue, and the highest monthly expenses. So that is a particular month last year where that firm invested a lot in a particular month in order to fund some other things that are going on. And that speaks to that, what that unit of analysis is in understanding a firm and their cash flows and the time span over which we should be thinking about a firm and its financial situation. It's not always easy to interpret that. And that's why it's so helpful to have this diaries methodology where we're talking to owners that that had that we can ask them about these decisions and what's going on in their finances. Next slide. Um, these are also firms that have a portion of the household income. More than half of them say that the business is the primary source of income. And about 18% of them, it's the sole source of income for the household. But we also have some businesses, about a quarter of the businesses, where the business is only a small portion of the household income, and that reflects the reality of a lot of small firms. More than half of the firms have at least one female owner. More than half of the firms have minority owners. And more than half of them, the owners are older. These aren't sort of fresh out of college or fresh out of high school people who are starting firms. These are people who have some experience in the labor market before they go into starting the business. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that transition of 0 to 1 workers. And when we look at the data, what we see, the question of 0 to 1 worker is typically examined within the first year of operation. And that businesses that don't hire a worker within the first year of operation are very unlikely to ever hire a worker. That number has come down a little bit through some recent work that we've had. To understand that firms transition registration types, which has made linking data difficult for a firm that, say, starts as a sole proprietor and then becomes an S corp, or a firm that starts as an LLC and then becomes an S corp, to make sure that we can accurately track those. And Robert Fairley is a researcher who's done a lot of work on this and recently published a book that does a better job linking that data. But we see of less than half of the firms that we're studying here, unsurprising based on the neighborhoods that we're in, started without paid workers. But they have more than 2/3 of them did make that transition within the first 18 months. Now those firms have an average of about 7 paid workers. Many of those are part-time. Most of those often are 1099 workers rather than W-2 workers. But that's one of the things we're going to be trying to understand and unpack is the decisions about hours and full-time versus part-time work, who is on the books, who's off the books, the decision between W-2 and 1099 workers. Next slide, please. So now we have a poll for you. We're going to ask everybody online to answer these questions now that you've seen something about who we're studying. And part of the reason that we're doing this is actually to gather information for our own work and understanding what do people believe about these kinds of firms before we start introducing the answers to this. So the first question is what percentage of our sample expects to grow over the next 12 months? Keeping in mind this is a question we asked in the midst of the current economic environment. The second question is what percentage has more than 4 weeks of cash on hand? And this is self-reported. We haven't gathered all this data on an ongoing basis for us to necessarily be able to say what the reality is. So we're asking about what percentage of them say they have more than 4 weeks of cash on hand, and what percentage of them report delaying a payment to themselves, regardless of how they pay themselves, in order to manage a cash crunch. So appreciate very much you taking just a few minutes here to answer your perspective on what those are, the answers to those are, and then we'll reveal the answers, and it'll be informative for us to understand people's perspectives on this. So I'll give you another couple of seconds. We've got about 37 answers. That's a little over half of our participants. Let's see if we can't get that over 70 here percent. Almost there. There we go. Okay, get up to 40 of our 60 people online right now. So we'll share the results here, and then we'll move on in the slides. But um, uh, almost all of our firms, there we are. You'll see almost all of our firms expect to grow. Um, and I'm going to make sure that I can close. There we are. So oh, as you can see there, roughly 80% of our firms expect to be somewhat or much larger in the next year. And on the right-hand side of that slide, you'll see a comparison to other surveys that are out there. They define their samples somewhat differently, but just to give you a sense, of course, in hindsight, looking back at this, small business people who start small businesses are optimists. No pessimists tend to start small businesses and certainly don't keep them alive for very long when they do. And so there is this substantial shift, regardless of the vibes of the economy, that people do tend to say their current condition and their expectation for growth is fairly high. Next slide. So, how much cash? I personally was surprised by this, that about half say they have more than 4 weeks of cash. If you go back, Laura, thanks. Uh, uh, More than 4 weeks of cash on hand. And they do state that they keep very close track of their cash. And then finally, their ability to mitigate cash crunches. The next slide. About two-thirds of them say that they have used reduced payments to themselves to manage a cash crunch in the last year. And you can see they are using a variety of risk management tools and mitigating financial challenges in the last year. But the primary one is that delaying or reducing payment to themselves. Next slide. So just very quickly, also asking them about what their main challenges are. On the financial side, about two-thirds say that cash flow and or unpredictable sales are their major financial challenges, and not quite half say that hiring and retaining qualified staff is their main non-financial challenge. Next slide. So now I want to turn to our panelists to talk about the overall environment that we're in. And want to start specifically with Chi because the JPMorgan Chase Institute has a number of relatively recent reports on some of these things, what's happened with small businesses since the start of the pandemic. And, Chi, one of the things that really has stood out in all of the data is um, from the 70s on, the rate of small business starts had been steadily declining until about 2020 when it jumped. And it seems a fairly obvious to explain like why that happened. But that elevated level has stayed elevated. We've sort of returned to a higher level and it's stayed fairly constant since then. Um, you have looked at some of those that jump and what's happened to firms, and interested in your perspective on what we see changing in the overall small business ecosystem based on the work that you've done using the JP Morgan Chase data.
Thanks, Tim. Before I start, I'll just issue my standard disclaimers that all of my opinions are my own and not those of JP Morgan Chase. Uh, but you're right, like the new business formations and applications that we've seen since 2020, I think they were a little bit of a surprise, but also a great source of cautious optimism for many of us who are kind of looking at small businesses and small business starts. And they may be leveling off, maybe but I think they've still remained higher than they have been in pre-pandemic times. So I think that is also encouraging. However, I think we don't all. It's not all good news, though. In our research, we found that a large share of those small businesses that started around the pandemic were started by what we call necessity entrepreneurs. So these are ones that we define as, they received unemployment insurance in the year before they started their business. So we believe that they, were engaged in wage work, became unemployed, and then therefore started a business, perhaps because they couldn't find suitable employment. So, for example, in 2021, in our sample, 21% of those new small businesses were started by these necessity entrepreneurs, compared to 2% in 2019. Right. And we see also that these businesses that were founded by the necessity entrepreneurs tend to have lower revenues that were founded by their counterparts, what we call like opportunity entrepreneurs. Right? And they'll catch up over time. We also see that they're more likely to exit within the first couple of years, and maybe because they're waiting for the labor market conditions to change, and they transition back to wage work. And so this type of self-employment could be a really important option for those who are trying to remain in the labor force even when labor market conditions are not great. But it does change what we might think about as the growth trajectories or what the growth aspirations are. And so that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to in the Small Firm Diaries is really seeing that qualitative reasons why people are starting to, or what makes them want to grow, and the steps that they take to get there, because that's something that's much harder to see in our administrative data.
Amy, you and LiftFund played a big role in a couple of these situations related to the dynamics that she is talking about. Is uh, when we had the pandemic, there were PPP loans and a lot of emergency support for small firms that encouraged starts, but also kept firms afloat. But also, LiftFund has been doing a lot in emergencies related to climate disasters and other situations that have happened within your footprint, the fires in Los Angeles, floods, and hurricanes. And so I'd love to get your perspective on what LiftFund is seeing in the changing environment and the role of helping firms survive, necessity entrepreneurs, how people are coping with emergencies.
Yes. So, unfortunately, we have had a large share of disasters we've responded to since our inception almost 32 years ago now There's been documented 50 disasters, a third of all our funding ever through those 32 years. We notice in our data has gone towards helping small businesses survive these disasters. And so it just so happens that our footprint, right? We were an organization born in Texas, and along that Gulf Coast, there's the disasters. We started growing into the Southeast, and there's another disaster lane. And now we get called to come about all over the nation, but most prominently recently with the wildfires in California. And what we're noticing on the ground is similar every time we hit the ground. And that is that when disasters happen, mostly the communities have not dealt with the scale, with the exception of a couple that have similar every year, the typical disaster comes. But for instance, in Hill Country, Texas, right now, that's the first time in anyone's lifetime something of that magnitude happened. And there's confusion right away about where to allocate funds. Initially, the thought goes to we must build housing, we must do mental health. And if you don't work in the small business space or have that typical understanding, that's not something that crosses the minds right away. So what we do is reach out very quickly to the economic development groups. Those folks will understand, right? What it is that if you do not save the small businesses quickly, the ripple effect is immense. What happens? And JPMorgan did an incredible, coordinated this study that shows these small businesses. And to your point, Tim, you've made it. On average, when we get in, they have about 2 weeks of liquid savings right on hand. Otherwise, so it's imperative that we help very quickly. If you don't help those small businesses, the ripple effect begins in the sense that when we get on the ground, we often hear things like, if someone hands me another stick of deodorant, I'm going to scream. That's because what they're thinking right away of is, are my children going to start the school year with their friends, or do I need to move to a community that's not going to be in disaster relief rebuild mode for the next, 5 to 10 years? Are my employees going to stay with me, or am I now having to account for having zero staff or way unlimited staff? And will there even be customers coming through here in the first place, or are they timid because they realize this is a recovery zone now and it's depressing? And so the ripple effect starts to get into, now the property values are decreasing. Now the revenue that came from taxes is decreasing. At the very moment that that community needs more funds, they are stifled. And so it is imperative that we help those small businesses. And that's what we're on the ground to do. But we are underfunded. I'm not just LiftFund. I'm talking the entire disaster relief space for small businesses needs advocacy and education, and it needs funding. And so we're also working on that as well, being that we realize now we're in the front seat, unfortunately, in many of these disasters for these small businesses.
Jay, the working in Baltimore, this is an area that in some I hope I wouldn't offend anybody in Baltimore with saying it. Baltimore has been in something of a slow motion disaster. It's not one event. It's a long-term, economically challenging environment, particularly inside the city limits of Baltimore, that reflects sort of some of what Amy is talking about, this issue of how businesses survive when your access to customers is uncertain, your access to workers is uncertain, your access to programs and policies and support is uncertain. At the same time, we are in this interesting environment where a lot more information is available, but at the same time, a lot more misinformation is available. People are more vulnerable to scams because it's easier for the scammers to reach out. And certainly we saw some of this in the pandemic. What is your experience on where small business owners in Baltimore are now in terms of trying to figure out the operations in a challenging environment? In some ways, more access to resources. In other ways, a lot more confusing of an environment of what resources are trustworthy and available and dependable.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that. And I mean, I preface this by saying, I've been in this small business, social entrepreneurship world in Baltimore now for like a better part of the last 10 years. And, while I've watched, then we assess what's happening on the ground, from what's happening at the entrepreneur level, at the community level, at the systems level, citywide. And what I want to just acknowledge and say that I've come to better appreciate is that while Baltimore at a systems level has gone through challenges over time, the small business community, social entrepreneurship community has actually been building really effective systems over time in a way, right? Because I would argue that what has kept our city afloat in many ways through crisis after or crisis is the fact that the folks that are actually on the ground every day continue to strengthen their ecosystems to hedge against some of the systemic challenges we faced. The good news is that, I feel like I've been on the conference circuit for the last couple of weeks, and it's been nice getting out there and talking about all the good things that are happening in Baltimore, right? Population increase last year, which means tax base increase, hopefully, as we see the next years to come, public safety issues going down, a lot of new leaders in the city that are really leading big agendas that I find very energizing. And I think we are in this moment right now in Baltimore where the undercurrent of things that have been happening in the small business community is going to start like merging with the bigger systems, things that are popping up with some of the new big agendas that we have as a city. So it's a great time, really, for me, in my opinion, about where we are, even in this conversation. But with that, I mean, one of the things I'll respond to that question from two nodes. One is that, when we think about the intermediaries who provide supportive services to small businesses, think about your small CPA firm or your small HR firm. The challenge we see is that those are small businesses themselves, especially the ones that are most affordable to the small businesses. And because they're small businesses themselves, we then have to worry about their own survival rates. Because if they can't survive, then what the small businesses themselves get in services or starts and stop fits, basically, because you don't have anything consistent. Our large corporate will always have the big four in their corner, and knowledge does not get lost very easily there. So at an ecosystem level, I think there is an opportunity for us, and there are some efforts happening in the moment of better organizing the service providers so that we can at least monitor those so we can help better advise entrepreneurs on how to access those services in ways that are vetted, trusted, and affordable so they don't spend 20 hours a week trying to find somebody who's going to do work for them 10 hours a week and is affordable. So there's an opportunity there. And then I say there's even greater opportunity, and this is happening even far better than I anticipated. The entrepreneurship ecosystem themselves, the entrepreneurs are spending more time with each other. And there's a lot more room for knowledge retention. Hey, who's your accountant? Who's your accountant? Who's this person that you work with? And who's done this service for you? There are a number of groups that meet around the month, around the city every month. And I think there's a lot more information exchange flow in there to help protect against the what will be institutional knowledge loss that entrepreneurs typically face. Those are two areas, like particularly in Baltimore City, that I see or with opportunities that we still need to work on, or things that are already happening to make sure that small businesses continue to be protected as we face the dynamics that we're discussing today around the systems that exist to serve them.
Yeah, Jay, your emphasis on the ecosystem and who are the service providers, but it also makes me think of something that Chi mentioned is the necessity entrepreneur. And Amy, I know the underwriting that you do, right? You don't make a loan to somebody who you don't think is going to stay in business, right? But there's this question of, are some of these ecosystems harmed by too many people, too many marginally profitable businesses being there, which affects, Jay, the ability to attract customers, the ability to attract workers, the ability to make investment. If, every year across the street, somebody else is going to open a money-losing business that undermines your ability to grow. I'm interested how you think about that ecosystem around how many businesses optimally so that the economy can grow and there are jobs with is not so many businesses that undermine the ability of anybody to survive for the long term.
I guess I should take that first from a Baltimore
Yes, I was going to point to you first, Jay.
Sure. I mean, let me maybe preface also with this. I mean, while Baltimore City is a city of just roughly 600,000 people within its city limits, we are surrounded by counties, right? So from a market standpoint, Baltimore City is an economic hub for the entire region. And when we think about how we support small businesses in the ecosystem, we have to be better refined in how we like put them in boxes, right? There are small businesses that exist to support a neighborhood infrastructure. There are manufacturers who are going to manufacture as a small business in Baltimore City. And the thing that they're creating is going to go across the country. Now, I don't care if we have 10 of those because there's just a lot more market across the country to go pursue, right? Now, should we have 10 of the same businesses on 5 blocks serving the same exact neighborhood? Maybe there's an opportunity there to maybe question that. So I just want a little bit more nuance in how we like put the small businesses in a box. That said, my background is somewhere in between engineering and industrial psychology. So I think about things from the systems and the people side. That's just the way my brain works. I often go when I talk to entrepreneurs that we support and or invest in, it's the why. Why are you doing this? Because I think the why really drives a lot about how we support them. Whether they're a necessity entrepreneur or this is like the thing that they've decided is their life's work because they got a degree in it and this is what they want to do. Um, in Baltimore, especially, some of the entrepreneurs we work with, some of the key themes that we've seen is one, like affordability of life. You may have a day job, but the day job is not enough to sustain living. Therefore, you need the side job to just make a little bit extra to just be able to live a decent life. And if that is the case, there's a different treatment in how we approach that because we do not want to rob anyone of dignity of being able to live a decent life. And I think there's a different way of approaching that conversation versus the person who just says, I don't want to be held down by a day job. So the gig economy is my thing. I'm just going to run a bunch of small businesses and I'll figure out how to patch them work. And then there are conversations there around, okay, the freedom that you want, again, agency matters here. But what are the consequences of that? How are you saving for retirement, right? Because ultimately, I see business as a way of people bringing their passion, their skills to some meaningful work. And the form in which that shows up is up to the person. And when we ask those questions, we then figure out how we can support them appropriately, right? We have folks who run small businesses who've retired from a career. This is the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, the reason they do that is a whole very different than a 21-year-old who says, hey, I got in trouble when I was like 18 and it's on my record and nobody will hire me, but I still have a family to take care of. So my only choice is to start a small business.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's like barely profitable, every little bit counts to take care of my family. Like for me, the nuance and why they're starting the business really then speaks to like, what is it that we're coaching them around? That said, the ugly side of all that, the proliferation of small businesses, and we'll say the same thing for nonprofits, is somewhat buoyed by an ecosystem. Folks like myself who go out and preach the message. Like, if you want to live out this entrepreneur dream, then go at it and we'll support you. But I also think we should just appreciate the fact that the market is going to have something to say at some point. If the thing you're bringing to the world is not of value or you're not doing it well, you're going to be forced to shut down. I think that's just okay too, right? People should be able to take a chance. And that's where I come from because the market will speak at some point and you will have to go get a day job if it's not working. And that's just the reality of it.
Chi, there's another variety of this, which is sort of in some ways the mirror image of rural communities. And the Institute has also done some looking at rural businesses where it's not so much there are too many businesses starting. There aren't enough businesses starting. There aren't enough people in some rural communities that are losing population. What have you seen in the difference between how rural small businesses and urban small businesses are coping with the current moment?
Sure. I mean, I think the rural businesses, yeah, one, there's not as many of them, right? We don't see them scale meaningfully as well as, I mean, already for urban businesses, it's difficult, right? We don't find that, we find less than 9% of them can really scale to that, like a critical threshold, like $1 million in annual revenues. And it's even less for rural firms, right? So some of them, part of that is industry, but it's not only industry, right? That's not the only thing that's going on there. So definitely like the place matters because like access to employees access to the market. But even in this day and age where we are expecting more online, more connectivity, I think location does still play a role. I think that makes a difference. And I also want to add on to what Jay was talking about in terms of like these, like why people start a small business, right? Maybe in a rural location, they are constrained by, maybe the jobs that they can find. And so maybe that is one way to live in a rural area if that's your preference, but, also make a living. And I think that's something we should respect as well. Like, there are lots of different reasons why people are choosing to be entrepreneurs, and not all of them are. They're all optimists probably, but they may not all be looking to grow the same way. And I think if we're looking at the ecosystem that is helping these small businesses, it's just not a monolithic ecosystem to serve a monolithic small business. I think for those business owners that are really just doing it out of necessity, or I think that's also an important role in our economy, right? If because I see that as the alternative is if someone loses their job or can't find a job, like do they drop out of the labor force? I think that's also not something that we would want for the economy. If there's a bridge, to be a necessity entrepreneur for a while, or until they do find something suitable, I think that is a perfectly good reason to do so.
Amy, LiftFund is a mission-driven lender. The point is to lend in places where other people won't lend because maybe it's a little too risky, or the entrepreneur has a record, so many commercial banks won't lend to them, or the prospects there are a little dicey. At the same time, you do need to get paid back. LiftFund is not a charity in the sense of we're just making grants. How do you think about the role that a lender can play in places where there isn't the ecosystem yet, there isn't all of the prospects. But if nobody invests, then there's never going to be any prospects. So, what do you think about the role that LiftFund plays, being sustainable itself, but also creating the environments for others to grow?
Yes, this is the $120 million question, because we in here have calculated what would LiftFund need to stay exactly where it is as far as impact, and not have to chase dollars. For philanthropy, it would need 120 million to make the impact it's making, 40 million of microloans about a year. That is difficult. And there's many reasons it's difficult, right? So as a micro lender, if I am talking to the average Joe on the street and I say I am selling microloans and they really cost me money, it costs me about $10,000 every time I make a microloan. Could you donate? And they're looking for the baby or animal, right? So it's an uphill climb in philanthropy in that sense. Where we get a good deal of philanthropy are through bank foundations. And so that is helping us provide the capital to lend. However, there's other expenses in here, right? We are a financial institution. Therefore, there has to be, and especially for those of us working in the disaster space, really robust fraud mitigation, infrastructure inside. That is highly costly. The more AI gets stronger, the more cost it takes us to be able to detect the fraud. So moving into places, and this happens for instance, in Hill Country, Texas, that is a rural area, obviously. We are seeing fraud 1 in 4 applications, both on the coming at us from a loan side and coming at us from a grant side. But we're detecting it masterfully because we have a lot of experience doing that, having funneled hundreds of millions through LiftFund on behalf of local government, state government when the pandemic hit. But we're also needing dollars, right, for operations. That's obviously, to have the humans to be able to detect, because it's not just technology that's detecting, it's really experienced humans that are detecting. And when I say it's crafty, it's very crafty how these folks are stealing identities. In rural areas, for instance, Kerrville, Texas, they were very surprised when we mentioned to them, we know that you'd like your chamber to hand out funds. We've got to tell you, this is what we see all the time, is that it will walk and talk and look just like your neighbor on the phone, on Zoom, and you'll begin to think, I'm absolutely sure I'm talking to my third grade teacher. You are not, you cannot ever be absolutely sure. It's just too, incredibly advanced these days on what fraud can do. So these are some hurdles that we face. We have such a responsibility and high demand to be able to serve, and yet the funding, that's what's tying us down is a lack of funding to be able to serve enough and meet the demand.
Amy touched on the AI question. I noted today that Intuit announced a partnership with OpenAI to build agents into QuickBooks and other features. And this is one of the things that I honestly have worried about a lot is who the AI agents actually work for. The Amy's point about fraud aside, right? There's a big difference between a 7% loan and a 5% loan, and really hard to tell if the AI agent you're interacting with is directing you to the 7% loan or the 13% loan, because somewhere in the background somebody's getting a kickback versus it's working for you and helping you find the best tools. How concerned, Jay, are you about access to tools that are trustworthy and how people determine what tools are trustworthy in the Baltimore ecosystem, particularly?
I'm not necessarily sure this is a Baltimore related answer. It's just broadly. I'm incredibly concerned. And I think that probably speaks for most small businesses in the country because we know, and I see it both in our coaching training work and also our investment side of the house, where folks are applying for capital. And in one sense, not enough use of technology and resources available out there to help inform their work. And on the other side of it, an over-reliance on technology that we then see and say, this doesn't make any sense because you over-relied on some AI model to give you projections that doesn't pass a smell test, right?
Mm.
And in my sense is that there's one, just the use of the technology, appropriate use of the technology. I don't know that entrepreneurs really are understanding the risks of using the technology, right? I just had a call with somebody the other day, like, please don't just upload your entire like organizational financial model with identifier information into an AI model. Can you please not do that,
Mm.
right? At least scrub the like personal identity data
Right.
before you put it into a model, right? Simple things like that. And I also, not just tools, but also just data. There's just too much data floating out there that is not vetted or well constructed. And entrepreneurs are using it to make decisions every single day about their business. It is not localized enough. It is like demographics aren't really like particular. And folks are thinking, this is the market I'm pursuing. And I'm like, well, no, nuance matters because the product you're creating is speaking to a very niche market. So when you do your pitch school, TAM, SAM, and all the stuff, like this is not believable. And you have false dreams about what is possible in this product that you're trying to get out to the world. So I do think that there's a general environment around tools and data that need to be better governed to hedge against the train. The train is already out the gate. We can't control it. When, large institutional systems and billionaires are pouring a bunch of money into our system, we've lost that battle. Now it's a battle of fighting defense and how people can use it responsibly. And that's kind of where I'm at this point. That's even from my own staff of 15 people who are trying to figure out how to use the technology to better serve entrepreneurs and how we do that responsibly and then expect responsibility from the entrepreneurs themselves. So I'll offer that. I think I'm gravely concerned, and I think there's a lot of work to be done to play defense.
So we're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm going to give each of you a quick second to think about a question because it's going to be a compressed, single answer. So the question is one thing that the small business ecosystem, needs right now that we should be paying attention to. What is the thing that's most important for us to be paying attention to? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask Laura to show a QR code on the screen. That QR code will take you to a variety of places to get access to information about this webinar, about the Small Firm Diaries, to sign up for updates, and all of those sorts of things if you're interested in following the project. As I mentioned early in the discussion, we're going to have things being published starting in the spring. We'll have some events in a variety of places. We'll have some more webinars sharing some results. And if you want to keep track of that, that QR code will take you to the places that you can see that. We'll also in the after this webinar be following up with those polls that we had, so that everybody gets to see what people believed and what we're seeing in the data, and that's something we'll be updating on an ongoing basis as we follow these firms where they are in terms of how they're managing financial challenges, in terms of their expectations of growth over the next year, in terms of their cash on hand and some key metrics. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. You pull out your phone and follow the QR code. So now I'm going to come back. Chi, start with you. The one thing the small business ecosystem needs at the end of 2025.
Well, I don't know, needs, yes, but I don't know how they're going to solve it. The one thing that I'm thinking about for the small businesses is health insurance. So it doesn't matter whether you are, a necessity entrepreneur in between jobs, or you're that small employer trying to provide insurance for your own family and then the few employees you've got. The access of affordable individual plans or small group plans. I think that, especially given the lack of the expiring subsidies, I think is really top of mind for me.
Yeah. Amy?
Well, I think we need a ready to deploy fund that can be used whenever there's significant business interruptions, whether that be caused by natural disasters, cyber attacks, construction in front of main thoroughfares, whatever it is that is interrupting businesses for a significant period of time. And we need support for first responders so that they can help those communities.
Jay?
Access to affordable back office support so they can stop getting what they pay for on a small budget because it is getting them in trouble. And I'll add an extra one, affordable access to childcare.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Jay, Chi, and Amy for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who joined us to listen. We're pretty excited about this project. We think there are a lot of interesting things to learn. And we'd appreciate if you follow us. If there's anything that you think we should be paying attention to that we didn't discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to follow up with us and tell us what we should be following, what questions we should be asking. If you don't think we're asking them, what you're particularly interested in. Again, thanks for your time. Thanks to our panelists, and we'll look forward to sharing information from the data that we gather in the first quarter of 2026. Thanks, everyone.